1. The lead mask. Mystery. In August of 1966, a chilling discovery atop Vintem Hill in Niterói gave rise to one of Brazil's most unsettling mysteries. 2 men were found dead, lying side by side. There were no signs of a struggle, no marks of violence, no indication that anything had gone wrong, at least not at first glance. Their names were Manuel Pereira da Cruz and Miguel José Viana, electronics technicians, ordinary men with seemingly normal lives. But what was found with them was anything but ordinary. Both were dressed in formal suits and raincoats, as if prepared to face some kind of extreme condition. But the detail that truly stood out was something else. Covering their eyes were handmade masks, made of lead. Masks with no holes, no way to see. Designed, it seemed, to block something. Invisible. Next to the bodies, a small piece of paper raised more questions than answers. Written on it were brief, cold, precise instructions. 4:30 p.m., be at the designated location. 6:30 p.m., ingest capsules. After the effect, protect metals. Wait for the signal. Mask. Nothing more. No explanation. No context. Autopsies failed to determine a clear cause of death. No substance was definitively identified, and the capsules mentioned in the note were never found. Another strange detail: the money they had with them had simply vanished. Friends later revealed that both men had a deep interest in spiritualism, out-of-body experiences, and alternative scientific theories. They believed it was possible to access other dimensions, or even make contact with something beyond our known reality. And that's where the case fully slips into the unknown. Why would 2 men climb an isolated hill, dressed formally, to ingest something unknown, cover their eyes with lead, and wait for a signal? A secret scientific experiment? A spiritual ritual gone wrong? Or a genuine attempt to contact something that should never have answered? Decades have passed. No definitive answers have emerged. And perhaps the most disturbing question still lingers. What exactly were they expecting to see before deciding to see nothing at all? 2. The Joelma Building and the Well crime. Long before it became the site of one of Brazil's deadliest urban tragedies, the land where the Joelma Building now stands already carried a dark past, one nearly forgotten. In 1948, a brutal crime shook the city of São Paulo. A man named Paulo Ferreira Camargo murdered his own mother and sisters inside the home they shared. After committing the crime, he attempted to hide the bodies in a well on the property, as if trying to bury not only the victims, but the truth itself. Days later, when the case came to light, the story took an even darker turn. Before he could be captured, Paulo took his own life. The land was marked, but time passed, and, as often happens, the city chose to move on. Decades later, a modern towering building rose on that very site, a symbol of São Paulo's rapid growth, the Joelma Building. For a while, it seemed like just another closed chapter in history, until February 1st, 1974. That morning, a fire broke out inside the building and spread with terrifying speed. Within minutes, what had been a normal workday turned into a maze of smoke, heat, and panic. People were trapped on the upper floors, surrounded by flames. Some tried to escape through the windows. Others rushed into the elevators, not realizing they were stepping into a deadly trap. In total, 189 people lost their lives. But among all the stories from that day, one stands out in an almost unexplainable way. 13 people were found inside a single elevator, completely burned. Their bodies were so badly damaged, they were never identified. They became known as the 13 Souls. To this day, at Vila Alpina Cemetery, there is a place where these victims are remembered. Visitors leave glasses of water beside the graves, a symbolic gesture meant to ease a suffering that, according to many, never truly ended. And this is where the story begins to cross from tragedy into something harder to explain. Employees and visitors of the rebuilt building have reported strange occurrences. Shadows moving through hallways, doors closing on their own, sudden drops in temperature, and most of all, sounds. Screams, footsteps, echoes that seem to come from somewhere that shouldn't exist anymore. Some believe it's nothing more than collective trauma, a psychological imprint left by a tragedy so intense it permanently marked the space. But others see something different, something older. As if what happened in 1974 wasn't an isolated event, but part of something that began decades earlier on that very ground. A cycle, a repetition. As if certain stories simply refuse to end. And maybe the most unsettling question isn't what happened there, but this: how many of those voices are still trapped, waiting for someone to hear them? 3. Operation Prato, Brazil's largest military UFO case. In the late 1970s, a small region in northern Brazil became the center of something that, to this day, defies logical explanation. The setting was Colares Island, in the state of Pará. Residents began reporting strange lights in the sky. They appeared at night, silent, precise, and, according to witnesses, intelligent. At first, it seemed like just another UFO sighting, but it didn't stay that way. Because the lights weren't just being seen. They were interacting. People started showing up with unusual marks on their bodies, burns, puncture wounds, and an overwhelming sense of weakness. Many claimed beams of light descended from the sky and struck them directly, as if something was being drained. The phenomenon became known as Chupacabra. Panic spread quickly. Families abandoned their homes after dark. Entire villages lived in a constant state of fear. And then, something highly unusual happened. The Brazilian Air Force stepped in. What followed was a classified military investigation known as Operation Prato, led by Captain Urangue Holanda. Its mission: document and understand what was happening in the region. For months, military teams collected evidence, photos, videos, and detailed testimonies. Reports described flying objects performing impossible maneuvers, instant acceleration, sudden changes in direction, objects that vanished and reappeared in different parts of the sky, as if ignoring the laws of physics. But the most unsettling part came later. According to Captain Hollanda himself, the military wasn't just observing the phenomenon. They were being observed. He described close encounters with massive objects, and even the presence of entities associated with these sightings. The operation was advancing. The evidence was growing. And then, without warning, it was shut down. Abruptly. The mission ended. The files were classified. The case was silenced. Officially, no final conclusion was ever released. But the story didn't end there. Years later, after retiring, Captain Hollanda broke his silence. In interviews, he revealed astonishing details, confirming that what they encountered went far beyond any known technology. Not long after those revelations, he was found dead. The official ruling: suicide. But for many, that only deepened the mystery. Why shut down such a significant operation without explanation? Why keep so many files classified, even decades later? And most importantly, what exactly was discovered on that small island that could never be made public? Operation Prato remains one of the most documented, and at the same time, one of the most concealed cases in Brazilian history. An episode where the government itself acknowledged that something unknown was present, but never explained what it was. And perhaps the most unsettling thought is this: somewhere out there, whatever it was, may have never left. The Evandro case, the Witches of Guaratuba. In April of 1992, a small coastal town in southern Brazil was pulled into a nightmare that has never been fully resolved. It began with the disappearance of a 6-year-old boy, Evandro Ramos Caetano. His sudden disappearance shook the town of Guaratuba. Search efforts began immediately. Locals came together. And for a few days, there was still hope. Until that hope ended in the worst possible way. The child's body was found in a wooded area. The scene was brutal, difficult to process, and even harder to explain. There were clear signs of extreme violence, details that immediately led investigators to a disturbing suspicion. This didn't look like a typical crime. It looked like a ritual. Pressure for answers was immediate, and it didn't take long for authorities to present a version of what had happened. 7 people were arrested. Among them were individuals connected to influential local families, including ties to political power. Quickly, a narrative took shape. A group involved in occult practices had carried out a ritual sacrifice in exchange for spiritual or material gain. The media amplified the story. The public accepted it. And then came the most shocking part: confessions. The suspects described the crime. They detailed the ritual. They reconstructed the events. It seemed like the case was closed, but it wasn't. Years later, when the case was already considered solved, something surfaced that changed everything. Recordings. Audio tapes revealed what had been happening behind the scenes of the investigation. The confessions hadn't been voluntary. They had been forced, under pressure, under violence, under torture. What once looked like a clear conclusion began to fall apart. Testimonies were questioned. Evidence lost credibility. And slowly, a far more disturbing possibility emerged. What if no one there was actually guilty? If the confessions were coerced? If the story was constructed? If everything had been manipulated? Then one question remains unanswered to this day. Who killed Evandro? The case became known as one of the most serious judicial failures in Brazilian history. Lives were destroyed, reputations ruined, and an entire town was left marked by a crime that was never truly solved. There is no consensus. No definitive culprit. Only versions, contradictions, and an unsettling silence. Because in the end, the most disturbing part isn't just the crime itself. It's the possibility that the truth was buried along with it. And more than 3 decades later, the case still echoes like an open wound. No justice, no answers. Just one question that refuses to go away. Is the real person responsible still out there? 5. The disappearance of Scout Marco Aurelio. In June of 1985, what began as a routine expedition would turn into one of Brazil's most baffling missing person cases. The setting was Pico dos Marins, one of the most challenging mountain ranges in the state of São Paulo. A group of scouts had made the climb under the guidance of an experienced leader. Among them was 15-year-old Marco Aurelio Simon. At first, everything went according to plan, until something went wrong. During the hike, one of the boys was injured and couldn't continue. Faced with the situation, the group leader made a decision that would later be heavily questioned. He allowed Marco Aurelio to go down the mountain alone to get help at the base camp. It was a familiar route, in theory, a simple one. But Marco Aurelio never made it. Time passed. Minutes turned into hours, and concern turned into alarm. When it became clear that something was wrong, search efforts began immediately. What followed was massive. Helicopters scanned the area from above. Specialized teams combed through every trail. Search dogs were deployed. Hundreds of people joined the effort. Days turned into weeks, and still, nothing. No backpack, no clothing, no signs of a fall, no trace. It was as if the teenager had simply vanished. And that's exactly what made the case so disturbing. In mountain environments, even in severe accidents, there are usually signs. Something is found. But in this case, nothing. The silence of the mountain became part of the mystery. Theories began to emerge. A fall into a deep crevice? A wrong turn leading to an inaccessible area? An encounter with someone on the trail? Or something even harder to explain? Years passed. The case went cold, but it was never forgotten. Decades later, new information reignited hope. Reports surfaced about a possible clandestine burial in the region, raising the possibility that Marco Aurelio may have been the victim of something far beyond an accident. Searches resumed. Excavations were carried out. But once again, no definitive answers. Today, Marco Aurelio's disappearance remains one of the country's greatest unsolved mysteries. A case with no conclusion, no closure, only absence. For his family, the pain of not knowing. For investigators, the weight of an unsolved case. And for anyone who hears this story, one haunting question remains. How can someone disappear completely in a place that has been searched over and over again? Maybe the answer is hidden somewhere on that mountain. Or maybe it was never there at all, and that's the most unsettling possibility of all. Because sometimes, what leaves no trace is exactly what should have left the most. So, the Varginha incident, Brazil's Roswell. In January of 1996, a quiet city in southern Minas Gerais became the center of one of the most intriguing UFO cases in the world. It started with what seemed like an isolated report. 3 young women, 2 sisters and a friend, claimed they saw something strange in an empty lot in the city of Varginha. According to them, it wasn't an animal. And it wasn't a person. It was a creature. Short, with dark, almost oily skin, large reddish eyes, and an appearance that gave off something hard to describe: fear, and at the same time, intelligence. They ran, but what they saw didn't stay between them for long. Soon after, reports began to spread about unusual activity across the city. Military trucks, police vehicles, areas being sealed off, everything happening quickly and quietly. Then the case took an even stranger turn. Witnesses began claiming that similar creatures had been seen in other parts of the city, and that some of them had been captured by military teams. None of this was ever officially confirmed, but it was never fully denied either. Among all the accounts, one stood out. A military police officer was said to have participated in the capture of one of these creatures, coming into direct contact with it. Shortly after, he developed a severe infection. His condition worsened rapidly, and he died. Doctors were unable to clearly explain what had happened, and that only deepened the mystery. The official explanation from authorities was very different. According to the Brazilian army, the entire SNBHVN was a misunderstanding. The girls had supposedly seen a local man in poor condition, someone known in the area, and misinterpreted what they saw. The military activity? Routine. The sightings? Coincidence? But for many, that explanation was never enough. Witnesses claimed they were discouraged from speaking. Reports seemed to disappear. Details were overlooked. And as time passed, the sense of a cover-up only grew stronger. The Varginha case began to be compared to the famous Roswell incident in the United States, not just because of what was reported, but because of how it was handled. Silence, denial, and gaps in the story. Today, nearly 3 decades later, the case still divides opinion. For some, it's nothing more than a chain of misunderstandings, coincidences, and exaggerated interpretations. For others, it's one of the clearest examples that something did happen and was hidden. But one question still lingers. If there was nothing there, why do so many people remain silent? And more importantly, what was seen in that city that was never meant to be seen? 7. The Apa Street Mansion. In the late 1930s, an elegant mansion in São Paulo became the setting for one of the most mysterious crimes in the city's history. Known as the Apa Street Mansion, the residence stood out for its imposing architecture and the quiet, almost eerie atmosphere surrounding it. But in 1937, that silence was shattered. Inside the house, 3 bodies were found. 2 brothers, Alvaro and Armando dos Reis, and their mother, Maria Candida. All of them had been shot. The scene was confusing. There were no clear signs of a break-in, no evidence of a widespread struggle, just bodies and questions. The investigation followed the most straightforward path. The official version claimed that one of the brothers, Alvaro, had killed his family after internal conflicts, and then taken his own life. Case closed. Except, the evidence didn't quite add up. Forensic reports began to raise serious doubts. Investigators identified bullets of different calibers, something that didn't match the idea of a single shooter. And the position of the bodies didn't align with what would be expected in a murder-suicide scenario. It was as if there had been someone else in the house. Someone who was never identified. At that point, the case stopped being just a family tragedy and became a mystery. Who really pulled the trigger that night? Was there a fourth person inside the mansion? Or was the truth simply overlooked? As the years passed, the house was abandoned. Time took over the structure, but not the story. And with time came the reports. Neighbors began to claim that, late at night, sounds could be heard from inside the mansion. Footsteps upstairs, doors creaking open, and in some cases, something even more unsettling. Gunshots. As if that night had never truly ended. Some say they've seen shadows in the windows, still silhouettes, watching. Others avoid even walking past the property, especially after dark. Years later, the mansion was restored, bringing back much of its original structure. But for many, that didn't change what matters most. Because what happened there was never fully explained. And maybe that's exactly what keeps the story alive. It's not just about the crime. It's about the feeling that something was left unfinished. As if the truth was left behind, trapped within those walls. And with every new report, the same question returns. Was the case ever truly solved? Or just closed too soon? 8. The official night of UFOs, 1986. On the night of May 19, 1986, something unusual began to unfold in the skies over Brazil. And this time, it wasn't just civilians reporting it. It was military radar. Shortly after 8 p.m., air traffic control centers across multiple regions of the country began detecting unidentified objects. Bright points appeared on radar screens, moving in ways that seemed impossible. They accelerated instantly, changed direction without slowing down, disappeared, and reappeared somewhere else entirely. This wasn't a technical glitch. It wasn't interference. Something was really there. Faced with the situation, the Brazilian Air Force made an immediate decision. Fighter jets were deployed. Combat aircraft took off with a clear mission to intercept the targets. But what happened next went far beyond expectations. Pilots reported visual contact, bright lights, moving with a precision that didn't seem human. Every time they attempted to approach, the objects would simply vanish, and then reappear somewhere else. In some moments, the pilots described something even more unsettling. The lights seemed to react, as if they knew they were being followed, as if they were playing. Records indicate that night, more than 20 objects were detected simultaneously in Brazilian airspace. Their estimated speeds exceeded anything known at the time. And perhaps most striking of all, this wasn't rumor. It was officially documented. Days later, Brazil's Minister of Aeronautics held a press conference, something rare and highly unusual. And he confirmed it. Unidentified flying objects had entered Brazilian airspace. No explanation, no defined origin, no control. Over the years, parts of the official documents were released to the public. Flight logs, radar data, pilot testimonies, all pointing to the same conclusion. Something happened. But what it was never explained. No known technology matched what was described. No country claimed responsibility. And no definitive answer was ever given. The so-called official night of UFOs became a landmark case. Not just because of the phenomenon itself, but because this time it couldn't simply be dismissed. Something entered Brazilian skies. It was tracked, it was pursued, it was seen. And still, it remained out of reach. Decades later, the case continues to be studied, debated, and questioned. But one idea remains deeply unsettling. If whatever that was showed total control over our systems, our radar, even our fighter jets, then maybe the real question isn't just what was it, but this: why was it there? And what stopped it from going further? 9. The Grand Circus Fire. In December of 1961, the city of Niterói was living an ordinary day. Until, in a matter of minutes, everything turned into a scene of absolute chaos. The Grand Circus Norte Americano was packed. Families, children, laughter, anticipation. More than 3,000 people gathered under the big top, ready to watch the show. But the show never ended. During the performance, a fire broke out. At first it seemed small, manageable. It wasn't. The flames spread with terrifying speed, consuming the circus tent within minutes. The material, highly flammable, turned the entire space into a trap. The fire came down fast. The smoke rose even faster. And suddenly, there was no way out. Panic took over. People ran in every direction. Children were separated from their parents. Screams echoed as the heat became unbearable. Some tried to escape by tearing through the canvas. Others were trapped in the middle of the crowd. Everything happened in minutes. The outcome was devastating. More than 500 people lost their lives, most of them children. The city was left in shock. But in the aftermath, an explanation emerged. The fire was believed to have been intentionally set. A former circus employee, known as De Quinha, was accused. According to investigators, he had started the fire out of revenge. The motive sounded simple, but the impact was irreversible. The tragedy marked the country and left scars that never fully faded. Among its most symbolic consequences was the rise of a figure still remembered today. Prophet Gentileza, a man who, deeply affected by the event, devoted his life to spreading messages of kindness and compassion through the streets. But time didn't take everything away, because even decades later, reports began to surface. People passing through the area at night claimed to hear things that shouldn't exist anymore. Children's laughter, distorted, rushed footsteps, and sometimes screams. As if that moment of panic had been frozen in time. As if the tragedy had left something behind. Some say it's just collective memory, a trauma so deep it manifests in different ways. Others believe the suffering that day was so intense, it left marks beyond what we can explain. The Grand Circus Fire isn't just a story about flames, it's about loss. 10. The Chupacabra, rural panic of the 1990s. In the late 1990s, something began happening in rural areas of Brazil that no one could explain. And it didn't start with people, it started with animals. Farmers began finding their goats, chickens, and sheep dead under strange circumstances. There were no signs of a fight, no traces of violent attacks by typical predators. But there was one detail that repeated in every case: precise puncture wounds in the neck. And something even more disturbing: the bodies were completely drained of blood. At first, many assumed wild animals were responsible: jaguars, stray dogs, anything that could explain the deaths. But as more cases appeared, that explanation made less and less sense. The cuts were too clean. There were no bite marks tearing flesh, no blood scattered around. It was as if something had done it, surgically. Then came the sightings. Locals claimed they had seen a creature near their farms, something that didn't match any known species. A biped, thin, with dark or grayish skin, glowing red eyes, and in some accounts, spines running along its back. The name appeared almost naturally: Chupacabra. Fear spread quickly. Farms reinforced their fences. People avoided going out at night. Groups formed to patrol properties, armed and waiting to encounter the creature. The story dominated TV programs, radio, and newspapers. Experts tried to offer rational explanations. Some suggested it was diseased wild dogs or other animals acting unusually. Others claimed it was mass hysteria, a psychological effect where fear transforms ordinary events into something extraordinary. But there was a problem. Not all evidence fit these explanations. The absence of blood, the consistent pattern of injuries, the lack of physical traces at the attack sites, all of it kept the mystery alive. Over time, the sightings decreased, the panic faded, but the question remained. What was really behind those attacks? An unknown animal? A mutation? An experiment gone wrong? Or something completely beyond human understanding? Even today, the Chupacabra lives on in popular imagination. For some, it's just a legend that grew bigger than reality. For others, it's a case that was never truly explained. And perhaps the most unsettling part is this. Unlike other stories, this one started with physical evidence. Bodies, marks, patterns, and yet, no one was ever able to provide a definitive answer. Because in the end, the fear didn't come from the creature alone. It came from the sense that something unknown was out there, feeding, and no one knew exactly what, or if it had ever truly gone away.